On today's Transport Evolved, we drive the BMW i3, Tesla plans a Giga Factory, and Top Gear goes plug-in crazy. Coming up next on Transport Evolved. Transport Evolved is sponsored by audiblepodcast.com. To claim your free audiobook from a selection of over 85,000 growing titles for your iPod or MP3 player, head to www.audiblepodcast.com/Transport Evolved. And by your kind donations. To make a gift to the show or to set up a monthly subscription, head to www.transportevolved.com. We thank you for your kind support. And proud to support Chronovirus, the latest book by Long Island author Aaron Crocco. To find out more and get a free chapter, head to www.aaroncrocco.com. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 173 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Sunday, November 10th, 2013. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
And I'm Mark Chatterley. How are you, Nikki?
I'm very well, thank you, Mark. You've disappeared, and we've already got our the wrong person in the show today. We're going to introduce our host, our guest, even, Tom Saxton. Hello. Because I pressed the button incorrectly. Mark, your video's not showing up. We're having a gremlin day today. Can you try pressing the button?
The button is not responding. No
video from Mark. I can hear you clicking. Tell you what, Mark, we'll call you back. We'll risk it. Okay, so Mark, I'm hoping you've had a good week and you can tell us about this in a second. We're going to ring Mark back. Tom, how are you?
I'm great.
Plug-in America's Chief Science Officer.
Science has got to be done.
I often think, I know it's horrible to say, but I often think of you a little bit like Mr. Spock with the big pointy ears, looking down one of those special Star Trek style microscope scanners and going, It's an electric car, Captain. Does that appeal or not?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's, I got that title because I missed a Plug-in America board meeting. And after the board meeting, I found out that I'd been given that title. So, of course, I wore a Star Trek shirt to the next board meeting.
Yeah, as long as it wasn't red, you're fine.
That's right.
I've now realised I've got a red shirt on today, but it's a lumberjack shirt, so it's okay. There we go. Mark, how are you today?
I'm okay. I've done nothing today. It's bad. And my video appears to have died again.
As soon as I switched to you vanished.
Yeah, I don't want to be on the show. I don't want people to see me. I'm delicate today.
You were wearing pajamas last week, Mark. What's that all about?
I was ill last week, and then I heroically slept in anyway because that's the kind of guy I am.
Well, there we go. Why don't I try and solve Mark's connection problems? And for those of you who are watching at home, actually, this is a really good illustration of Mark's on the lookout for a new computer to help him with Transport Evolved. He very valiantly edited TEN this week because I was off driving the BMW i3. And so Mark decided to film and edit at his house. And unfortunately, your computer's rather old, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it's an early 2007 model iMac, which I've upgraded the RAM on once, so it's now at maximum RAM.
And it struggles a bit with video, doesn't it? Poor
editing 10. It was giving me when you render the video while you're sort of editing, I was getting 2 frames per second, which meant some of my edits weren't quite where I thought I was placing them because I had on a 60 frames per second video, I had an error margin of 30 frames. It wasn't good. Dear,
never mind. But hopefully, Mark, you are still doing what you normally do, which is write down where we are in the show. And today, because you started at the beginning, it's all good. I'm going to try ringing Mark back one more time. We're going to start the show today, Tom, by talking about the BMW i3. Now, have you had a chance to drive that yet?
I've seen one. I have not driven one.
Okay, well, I had a go. Without me doing the no, I did something everybody else did. I was one of a mass of British journalists. I mean, they did pretty much invite everybody to drive the car. Mark very valiantly let me go instead of him because he wasn't feeling all that well this week.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
It's brilliant. Don't you love live TV? Anyway, the BMW i3, we went from a London hotel, swanky London hotel. I will spare you the details of the swanky London hotel because it was a bit bizarre. All the way to Brands Hatch, the racetrack, and I got to drive the i3 in its, I suppose, its native city environment, but also out on the road. And one of the things that we worked really, really hard to try and solve was, or to understand, was the one pedal driving, which is very much like the Active E. You can lift the accelerator off, and when you lift the accelerator off, the car kind of creeps to a stop or slows down to a stop. Now, if you're driving at 70 and you lift off, it slowly coasts down to a lower speed. If you're driving at city driving speeds and you lift off the accelerator, it slows down like you just put your foot on the brake. Now, you've got this kind of feature in the Roadster, haven't you, Tom, in the Tesla Roadster?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
I would say, though, that this implementation of the BMW i3 regen braking is actually stronger than it is in the Tesla Roadster. And a little bit too strong, I think.
Stronger also in the Mini E.
Yeah. But the thing that caught me off guard is if you lift off the accelerator pedal, the car will come to a complete stop. It puts its brake lights on. And we asked BMW, we were curious, if you're stopped at lights and you've lifted off your accelerator pedal, there goes Mark's image again, and there's a problem with someone comes from behind and hits you. If you're sat there with your brake lights on because you've just come to a stop, does the car move forward? Because you're not using any friction brakes. And they went, yes. So if you've bought an i3, you're going to have to get into the practice of putting your foot on the brake when you come to a standstill.
Yeah, I think that's why in the Roadster, if you lift your foot off the accelerator, it'll slow you down to about 2 miles per hour. But then to actually stop, you have to use the friction brake. And I think it's exactly for that reason, so that it keeps people in the habit of using the friction brake. Because,
I mean, I kind of sat in the traffic lights and I was thinking, hey, I'm not using the brake here. I'm just hovering my foot over the gas pedal or the accelerator. And then when I press, when you press, it moves forwards. Now, this is the other funny thing. If you touch the brake pedal when you've come to a complete stop, and then you lift off the brake pedal as well, so you've got no feet in either pedal, the car will creep forward. So it's got a creep function on the brake, but when you come to a stop with just the accelerator alone, and you lift off the accelerator, so you've got no feet on any pedals, the car just stays still as long as it's on a straight, flat piece of road.
I think that's why they've made the nose so cut off on the i3, because they're just afraid everyone's going to they need that extra foot of space because people are going to go, I'm moving, and then put their foot on the brake.
I do like the single pedal driving. I think it's great. I would like a little bit more ability to coast, which BMW drivers have said, yeah, there is a coast function. You can, what they call glide, or you put it into coast mode, and there is a light that lights up on the dash. I didn't see it, but finding that sweet spot on the BMW i3 in the time I had it seemed to be quite difficult. It seemed to be either you drive it like a normal car and then as soon as you lift off, it starts braking. And I wish there was a button that I could press that just goes, okay, I want you to go into glide now. Of course, you can whack the car into neutral, but that's not always the best solution. Which, I don't know. Mark, what do you think about? Would you feel comfortable with that mode of operation with just driving with a one pedal?
When we had the Smart for 2, that was the closest I've ever been to one pedal driving with the maximum regen on, and I quite like that. It took a little while to get used to, but once I got used to it, I really liked it. And so I like where it's going. I like that movement towards a one pedal driving system, but it does seem complex if stopping the car by coming off the accelerator is different than stopping the car with using the brake. You've introduced a kind of branching system, which I'm not quite sure the human brain is going to naturally be able to follow. We like things operating in a consistent way.
I agree. I mean, I did talk to several people about it, and they did say it felt a bit unnerving to begin with. You also, coming off the regen is really almost too harsh, I think, sometimes lifting off the pedal. So you can accelerate really nicely to 70. As soon as you lift back, if you lift back a little bit too hard, to cruise at 70, the brakes kick in and you slow back down again. So it's just trying to find that sweet spot. I know BMW Active E drivers who've told me you get used to it because the BMW Active E is essentially the drivetrain mule for the i3. Very interestingly, BMW didn't want to talk about any of the drivetrain failures that have happened with the Active E. And I did kind of try and grill them on it. Tom, have you studied this with Plug-in America, some of the Active E drivetrain failures?
I haven't.
No, but you're aware of them, presumably.
Not especially, no.
Okay, so there was I believe, some of the Active E drivers, there was a bearing or a seal on one of the bearings that was not working properly, and it caused some gearbox problems. That's, I think, what's right. We've got an Active E driver in the forum who says it's a non-issue now. But I'm not sure how many more miles he's going to be doing in his Active E, because he's just brought home his Tesla Model S today. So congratulations to Dennis. Saw the trip on Twitter, so congratulations to him. I'm sure he's very, very touched. He's watching the show after having, just driven back home in a new car, and he's not playing with it. He's watching the show. Maybe he's watching it in the car. Who knows? All right. So overall impressions of the BMW i3 is that it's a very competent car. It's very smooth and quiet inside. It's very typically BMW. No touchscreen display, which I find disappointing, but that's a BMW thing. They've got the little iDrive knob, which I think is inherently dangerous in all BMWs, because you look down to try and figure out what the writing says on the iDrive instead of just looking at the touchscreen, which is closer, obviously, to looking out the window. The other thing is that the boot space is very small, even on the range extender. When the range extender comes in, you don't notice it. BMW is insisting this range extender is not for long distance drives. It really is a case of, essentially, it was hinted that if you know you're going to be making a long distance trip in a BMW i3 with a Rex, you should put the Rex on fairly early on in the journey so that it supplements the electric power for most of the trip, so that you're not suddenly left with less performance or less power. Which is a user selectable thing. So again, this is another issue, and it's a worry I've had about the i3 from the beginning, is that if you're going on a long trip in the i3, it's not something you can just allow happen like you would in a Volt or Ampere. You don't just drive and it happens automatically. You have to think, I'm going 160 miles today, get into the car, I need to switch the motor on, the engine on, because I'm making that trip. Yeah. And the more I learn about this car, the more complex it seems to be. It seems to be solving problems or maybe non-issues with EVs with layers of complexity that or in the guise of giving the customer the choice. But BMW don't also at the same time don't want you to make that choice. So you've got the range extender in the i3, but it's not for long distance driving. Oh, and it's also not to be used all the time. And so, well, why have we got the Rex? Well, we don't actually think anyone's going to need the Rex, and actually we're going to encourage people not to buy it. Well, it's
so
interesting.
Why is it an option? Well, because people might want it.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was talking, the government guy that we met at Cenex, Mark, a couple of months ago, he was there. And one of the questions that people came up with again and again and again was, why are you selling the Rex? And what's the purpose behind the Rex? And BMW admitted, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, however long it takes, people will slowly stop ordering the Rex, and the Rex will become, I suppose, surplus to requirements in the lineup, and less people will use it. Some other interesting sides from this. BMW claims to have partnership with Chargemaster in the UK to give 85% coverage of all public charging stations using a roaming agreement. Not only that, but the ability to know if those charging stations are online and functioning and active. Mark, what do you say to that? Unfortunately, we just have Mark.
Can't even.
Unfortunately, we have Mark with no video. We can't see you laughing, Mark.
All right, these companies can't even provide that kind of information on their own networks, on their own websites. What on earth makes BMW think they're going to provide it aggregated for their customers is absolutely insane. There was one company, which is the main company as part of this deal, who, when we were doing the Zoe review, I sent them a message going, you've got a wonderful map on your website. That's brilliant. It tells me where all the points are. Doesn't actually tell me how powerful they are, what type of connectors there, and how much power I can draw from it. And I've got a car that will it will change between I need to be there for an hour for a full charge to I need to be there for 7 hours for a full charge. Can you send me that information or update your map so it has that information? And their reply was, we don't have that information. They didn't know the power of their own charging stations in their own network.
Tom, is this a problem in the US as well?
Certainly yes, I suppose so.
With Blink and everybody
the
else.
charge stations with Blink and with ChargePoint and with SEMA Charge, they all tell us whether they're level 1 or level 2 or DC quick charge. They don't generally tell us the voltage, so we have 208 volts or 240 volts, and sometimes that 20% difference is kind of a big deal. And yeah, some of them have lower current limits. I mean, most of them are 30 amp stations, but some of them are less, and those are not really marked. So yeah, and in terms of knowing whether a station works or not, they can tell you whether or not their station is communicating with the network, but that's a different matter than whether or not the station's working. You can have a station dead and still, you can have a station non-functional and still talking to the network, and you can have a station that's working and not talking to the network. So, I mean, yeah. It is a reliable info.
It is a nightmare. Anyway, BMW reckons it's solved it. The other thing that BMW is going to do is what's called it's various different packages for ownership. Okay, so that £20 a year will give you access to this BMW network, connected drive network of all these different charging stations, where they will give you a roaming agreement with all these other charging stations. To begin with, it will probably be free, but then eventually it will be a pay-as-you-go, likely to be pay per charge event rather than pay per kilowatt hour to begin with, because in the UK, in order to sell electricity on, you need to be a utility company. And the charging providers aren't, apart from Ecotricity, which I think will be laughing all the way to the bank if it decides to do that. Not that it has, but if it would, at some point in the future decide to do that, it would be very advantageous for it. The other thing, though, is the idea of having cars that you can borrow, BMW fleet car. You can basically, if you sign up for a particular part of the mobility program, you can say, okay, I'll pay a certain amount of money every month. BMW will give you 700 credits per year, and you will exchange those credits throughout the year for rentals of gas cars. They'll all be BMW models, starting with a 1 Series, going right up to something like an X5. And depending on what car you have, depends on the credits. Now, BMW's gone with a credit system rather than a monetary system, which I think is very telling. It's much harder for customers to figure out the value of their rental if they're not using a pound sterling or a dollar equivalent. If they're using a credit equivalent, it's just so many credits from their allowance. Now, the base level is 700 credits per year. You can buy more credits. You can basically top up using exchange money for credits. But for that 700 credits per year is about the equivalent of 7 days worth of 1 Series rental. And BMW can tack this on as a mobility package and charge you £40 per month for the ability to do that, to use that package, plus access all the charging stations. £40 a month added on to whatever the headline lease deal was is very interesting. But here's something else, which is, I think, probably a breaking news item. BMW is saying it's starting a new lease service. It won't tie you into the lease. So you can enter into a 36-month lease scheme, and you can exit early and not pay a prepayment penalty. So you don't have to pay to the end of your lease. Secondly, BMW is offering its own insurance product. And what it's going to do is you tell it how many miles you do per year. BMW will then look in your car and look at your odometer readings over the course of the year. If, say, 6 months in, you've done 5,000 miles, BMW will ring you up and go, hey, you've reached your 5,000 miles that you said you were going to do on your insurance. We're going to have to charge you extra for, you need to move on to a different plan. Or if you get to the end of the year and say you've done 5,023 miles, you pay an excess per mile fee to your insurers, which is a BMW subsidiary or a BMW approved insurers. I think it's through Allianz. And they will then kind of add that extra premium retrospectively to your account. Now, BMW at the moment says it's not interested, and it says we will never charge people insurance based on how fast they go or where they go? Because that was one of my questions. Okay, if you're using the telematics on board the car and you're monitoring what your drivers are doing, does that mean, for example, if, Fred Bloggs, who has an i3, drives at 85 everywhere on the motorway and does a lot of driving, you're going to charge them more than his cousin who drives on the motorway at 65 in order to get maximum range? They said, no, we're not going to do that. But what we might do in the future is reward drivers based on how they've driven historically. What do you guys make of that? Tom?
Yeah, actually, I just got an offer from my insurance carrier saying, hey, if you let us put a box in your gizmo so we can watch how you drive, we'll lower your premiums. And yeah, I'm not very happy, and I'm not very excited about that kind of thing.
Mark?
Yeah, I think no, no. I like the idea of car tax, road tax, or vehicle exercise duty being based upon how many miles I drive, where I drive. You start getting into very odd territory, and you give out more information than you realize you're giving out, because you're giving out where you work, because you commute to work and back. So they know where you live, but they now also know where you work. They know where you shop because you drive to the shop to get your shopping. They know how often you shop. And suddenly by doing this, you're not just giving them the data that they say they are collecting. You're giving them lots more data. And that's what I don't like about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless it was suitably vague. If it was like, I'll pinpoint your car within 5 miles, then I'm like, yeah, fine, that's fine.
I think what they're trying to do is go, okay, we know that you've driven 10,000 miles a year, therefore we're going to charge you an appropriate premium. Because certainly in the UK, people say all the time, oh, I'm going to do less miles than I actually do. And insurance companies have started to check up on that. But anyway, moving forward, Renault Nissan this week announced a partnership with Mitsubishi on electric cars, as among other things. Really interestingly, Renault is going to give Mitsubishi some sedans, mid-sized sedans, to sell in the US as rebadged Mitsubishis. That's the first thing. But then Mitsubishi, Nissan and Renault are going to be working on a global small car electric platform, which means we're going to see a smaller electric car come from Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi. And the three automakers are also going to work together very extensively on EV technology. Obviously, there are some benefits to working together. Cheaper, effectively the power of three. So you can get bigger orders for things like lithium-ion batteries or lithium-ion components, rare earth metals for motors, etc., etc. But do we think Mitsubishi can be saved by Renault and Nissan? Obviously, Nissan's done really well in the US. Mitsubishi's done really poorly. Renault hasn't sold in the US for, 20 years, Tom? If maybe 30 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the last... if you ask most Americans about Renault, they're either going to say... they're probably going to say the Renault 5 and Dude, Where's My Car? I think that was the last time I ever saw a Renault in a public, in a film from the US. That was one of the last cars to be sold in the US, I think, the Renault 5. But what do we think of this? Do we think Mitsubishi has a chance of recapturing some of the market thanks to Renault? Could, for example, the Renault Zoe be heading to the US as a Mitsubishi? And would anybody buy it? Obviously, they'd have to do something to the Chameleon Charger, Tom.
I think those tiny cars appeal to a pretty small audience in the U.S. I mean, I love the Smart 4.2 and the Fiat 500, and I'm definitely seeing a lot of Fiat 500s around, but I'm not sure how broad that market is.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be a very interesting one. We'll see what happens. Mark?
I don't know. The Zoe would be an interesting car in the US, I think, but there are so many changes they would have to make to it. It essentially becomes a different car. Once you remove the Chameleon Charger from the Zoe, what's it got? It's got 32 amp charging, okay, but it's got no rapid charge. So they'd have to put a rapid charge port on it, which would be CHAdeMO because of the relationship with Nissan. So becomes a Leaf but smaller, and you lose some of what makes the Zoe the Zoe. I think what's more interesting is this global mini platform. If they do that well, if it has a chameleon charger and it has a Chatterley as well, and just all the technology, and it's really light and light, then I can see them taking on the UK and Europe sales with that car.
It's going to be an interesting one to see. Moving back story, someone in the chat room is talking about bricking and Vampire powertrain on cars. Because obviously the i3 has an active thermal management system, I was trying to ascertain from BMW what the drain is on the system. From what they've told me, now there weren't that many engineers there, but from what I was told, the i3 effectively switches off its active thermal management when a car is not being used. Which seems very strange, and I didn't quite understand that. Because I said, well, what about the battery drain if you leave it for a couple of weeks? And they went, well, there's no battery drain. I went, but what about the active thermal management? And they went, no. It doesn't take any power from the battery pack when it's sat still. So it might have just been, C-level folks who didn't quite understand my question, or it might just be some weird engineering. More on that in the future. But talk about weird engineering. This is a car that's debuted or due to debut in Tokyo next month. Take a look at this. So there you go. Some nice Japanese heavy metal rock there for you. But also, is it Japanese heavy metal rock, Mark?
Yes.
Yes.
I you're asking me about something contemporary. This.
It's all right. Tom is now trying to ring because Tom's been kicked off Skype. It's all happening here. Tell us about this car. Who's it by and what's it about?
So this car has come from Nissan, from a Skunkworks project. So a Skunkworks project, for those who don't know, is where a big company gets a team together and basically says, go and make something, and we want it to be innovative in this way. And then that team is essentially given free rein to make a product. And famous examples would be the Google glasses. They came from the X Lab. The self-driving car is an ongoing Skunkworks project for Google. I'm guessing that's probably moved more mainstream now. And Nissan apparently has had a team working on an EV. So they claim this is the EV where form has followed function.
Yeah.
And it's a 3-seater EV with a single seat in the front, which then displays out to 2 at the back. And it's called the Blade Glider.
Blade Glider. And it's a deltoid car, for those of you who like your maths, your geometry. It's a deltoid shape, which essentially means it's a kind of triangle, but not quite. It's a quadrilateral that resembles a triangle. Is that a good definition?
I think that's a non-mathematical definition.
Non-mathematical definition. So it's basically a delta wing. It's like the delta wing race car that was in Le Mans last year, and it's a bit like the ZOD, which is a delta wing car. Very, very narrow front wheels, or very, very narrow front track, 1 meter apart. The front wheels are 1 meter apart. The back wheels are much, much further apart. There's a 30-70% weight distribution, so 30% at the front, 70 at the back. The batteries over the rear wheels, the motors at the rear wheels, rear-wheel drive sports car. It's a concept car. It's due to be unveiled in Tokyo next week, or next month, later this month, sorry. And Nissan has said, this isn't just a concept car, we'll probably make this at some point. which I find
awesome.
Difficult to believe, Tom.
Yeah, that looks like a pretty cool car, but yeah, it's a little odd.
I don't think anyone is going to. I shudder to think how much it's going to cost as well. Anyway, moving on. Guess who the new UK government advisor is for the electric car industry, Mark?
You want me to guess?
Oh, you wrote the story, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Maybe Tom should guess.
Go on. Do you know, Tom?
I'm sorry, I had a little distraction here. What was the question?
The UK has a new electric vehicle government advisor. Now, in the UK, we have a history of putting people in government advisory positions who know absolutely nothing about the industry that they are working in. And very much the case that in the UK we have ministers for various things. We'll have a minister for agriculture, a minister for education. The current minister for education seems to think that the UK would be better off if we went back to some 1930s caricature of what education should be, where we all have reading, writing and arithmetic and
can't do basic maths. He in one of his proposals, he wants over half of the UK schools to be operating above average. Which is a quote from actual In the Commons debate he had.
Lovely.
Bless him.
Agricultural ministers in the past, when I was growing up on a farm in East Anglia, the agriculture minister back then, 20, 30 years ago, was so bad, they ended up basically killing the UK's agricultural lead on the world. But now they've actually wised up, and this is thanks to Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. For those of you who don't know, the UK is essentially it's a coalition at the moment, so we've got the Conservative majority, but then we've got the Liberal Democrats that are kind of tucked in at the side, and the Liberal Democrats have come under a lot of political pressure. I was someone who voted for the Lib Dems. There was Labour, Lib Dems and Conservatives, and I kind of went, I don't really want Labour Party in anymore. I definitely don't want the Conservatives in, so I'll go with the Lib Dems. And the Conservatives got enough to it was kind of a case of if the Lib Dems had gone with Labour, then Labour would have stayed in, but Lib Dems went with Conservatives, so the Conservatives came in. Anyway, brief rundown of the political situation in the UK, Mark. So Nick Clegg, who is trying desperately, because it's coming up to election season, trying desperately to reassert himself as a Liberal Democrat rather than a Conservative whipping boy. Very, very desperate to portray the party as being green and forward-thinking. And he said that the government, as a consequence, he's managed to get the UK government's new electric mobility advisor to be one Mr. Elon Musk.
Which is awesome.
Which is very interesting. Would that be allowed in the States, Tom? Or would that be anti-competitive?
Yeah, that seems kind of weird. It seems like you'd want somebody more neutral.
Yeah. Well,
also a foreigner. I'm guessing if the US tried to install somebody from the UK in a government position like that, that would not be well received.
The funny thing is, they called him in several reports. They called him American, which I found quite amusing. I think he has citizenship, doesn't he now? But he's actually South African, isn't he, by birth?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know about his citizenship status, but he's definitely South African.
So that was interesting. So the Brits were making the same mistake. But I mean, I think we were at the official launch event in London a couple of weeks ago, and Musk was asked about governmental advisory positions, and I suspect that someone there knew and wanted to drop a hint, but he sort of said, I know a guy for the job. So whether he already, I would just assume that he was already in discussion and it was already happening. Yeah. Either than that, or it's happened really quickly, Mark, which I doubt.
No, the impression I got was he knew something that he couldn't say publicly.
And so he just kind of said something along those lines. But it's going to be interesting because obviously I don't know if there's going to be any backlash to this against Tesla. You can just see what Top Gear are going to say about it. Anyway, moving on. Let's go and see Mr. Aaron Crocco, and he will tell us about chronoviri.
It was supposed to be just another cargo run, but for Ken Mallory and the 3-person crew of the Raven, an anomaly in deep space changes everything. An unexpected turbulence shakes the small ship like never before, allowing a deadly virus aboard. One by one, the infected crew is thrown back in time to relive a near-death experience, only this time, death may be closer than they remember. My short story Chronovirus is available for Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook, Kobo, iBooks, Sony, and for all other devices and e-readers through Smashwords. Learn more about Chronovirus by visiting my website at www.aaroncrocco.com.
Ooh. Someone in the chat room, Dennis, is going, thanks for delaying the start of the show so I can join in live. I don't have the heart to tell him that we were late starting today because one of the monitors blew up, and then the piece of software that we use, Wirecast,
Forgot we bought it,
and every 5 seconds it was going, this is a demo copy of Wirecast, which we decided you probably didn't want to have on a live stream. Anyway, moving on. All right, this is a tough story to talk about, and there goes Mark's picture again. A third Tesla Model S hit the headlines this week after hitting a tow bar on the freeway, an old tow bar that had fallen off a truck, and eventually catching on fire. Now, the way the driver tells it, he actually wrote a blog post which he gave to Tesla Motors, which they've put on their official website. It says the following. I was driving home from work on the interstate in the right lane at approximately 70 miles per hour following a truck. In the middle of the lane, there was a rusty 3-pronged trailer hitch that was sticking up with the ball in the air. The truck in front of me cleared the object. I did not have enough time to swerve to avoid the hitch, and it went below my car. I felt a firm thud as the hitch struck the bottom of the car, and it felt as though it even lifted the car up in the air. My assistant later found a gouge in the tarmac where the item scraped into the road. Somewhat shaken, I continued to drive. About 30 to 45 seconds later, there was a warning on the dashboard display saying, car needs service, car may not restart. I continued to drive, hoping to get home. About 1 minute later, the message on the dashboard display read, please pull over safely, car is shutting down. I was able to fully control the car the entire time and safely pulled off left to the left shoulder on the side of the road. I got out of the car and started to get all my belongings out. After 5 to 10 seconds of getting out of the car, smoke started to come from the front underbody of the car. I walked away from the vehicle to a distance of about 100 yards. More smoke started to come out of the bottom of the car, and about 2 minutes later, after I walked away, the car caught on fire. The front of the car caught on fire. So it took a while, Tom, for this impact to have an effect on the battery. Now, we were talking about this at the beginning of the show. Obviously, this is something I'm guessing as Chief Science Officer of Plug-in America, they're going to be asking you to be looking into. And I'm sure that the NHSTA are looking into it, and I know that Tesla's looking into it. It seems to me that, this is the second time a Model S has hit a piece of debris on the road and it's caused it to effectively have a contained fire in the front of the car. Now, I'm being very careful with my language here because we've talked about the design of the Model S's battery pack before. The Model S's battery pack is designed, if there's an intrusion into the battery and there's a short circuit and it overheats, because that's what happens when you short circuit things. Energy is transferred, it overheats, starts on burning. There is foam within the battery pack that expands, or liquid that expands when it heats, that seals that fire into a specific part of the battery pack, keeps the car safe. And that's why we've never seen a Tesla Model S that's been completely engulfed in flames, right?
Right, yeah.
So, yes, there seems to be a design flaw. I think it's probably safe to say at this point. But it's no more a design flaw than someone hitting their car's sump, as they are driving along on the road. The only thing I can think about at this point is that the Model S must ride very low.
Yeah, so it has this automatic suspension that lowers automatically at freeway speeds to give it presumably better aerodynamics.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure I'd be ready to call it a design flaw. I mean, how many gas cars are destroyed a year driving over gigantic pieces of heavy-duty metal.
Yeah.
I mean, if you did that in a gas car, maybe it takes out the transmission instead of starting a fire. But
Yeah.
I can't imagine a gas car being especially happy at having a piece of metal that can lift a 45-pound car and make it lift up at 70 miles an hour.
I mean, that's a heck of an impact, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, it is.
It is. It's interesting because the Model S has that plate along the bottom of it, so it has to go through that plate. So the force involved is massive, and like you were saying, if you were to compare that to an internal combustion engine car, it may not cause a fire, but it's going to stop the car because it's going to be ripping through transmission, the motor and engine, and there'll be oil everywhere, and God forbid it touch the brake line and things like that. So I don't know. What I keep coming back to is in this instance, in the first fire instance, is the car didn't stop working and just flames were everywhere. No. It tells the driver something's going wrong, you need a service, and then obviously something else happens, and it goes, actually, you need to pull over and get out of the car. And it was a very kind of, I know something's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's
obviously,
what
if a piece of metal like that hits a gas tank or a fuel line and that touches the exhaust pipe on a gas car, that's going to be instant inferno.
Yeah.
So, I'm having a hard time getting good perspective on this in terms of what are the risks, because obviously there's 150,000 car fires a year in the U.S., and I think we're giving an awful lot of attention to two of them.
I think the thing that concerns me more than anything else is not the fact that it's dangerous, because I don't think it is dangerous, as Mark's just said. The car really, this guy drove after hitting the debris, and the car went, yeah, you should probably take me to a garage. And he carried on driving, and they went, no, seriously, I need to stop. And then he paid attention. And he was safe, and all his stuff was safe, and the car didn't hurt anybody. That's great. I think the thing that would, the two things that concern me, one is, driving along and you hit a tow hitch. If you hit it in any car, as you said, Tom, it's going to cause a lot of damage. It seems unfortunate that two Teslas have now hit debris in that way. The question I have is, are roads in the US that congested that you cannot see debris on the road? And again, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, but one of the things I would say is, if you're driving a Model S, if you're a Model S driver, maybe you just want to back off 2 or 3 seconds. That's my advice. I mean, I absolutely. I've let me put it like this. I'm a keen cyclist, or I used to be a keen cyclist, and I learned the lesson the hard way. I used to slipstream cars, and I was 18, 19, riding from the farm where I grew up back to the train station to get on the train to go back to uni. And I had front panniers on my bike. I had rear panniers. I had a big rucksack on, which went about this high off the top of my head, so about a good foot above my head. Crash helmet on. I was on a touring bicycle, so I had my head down, pedaling like crazy in the rush hour along a 3-lane road at 30 miles an hour. The car in front of me stopped. And I was probably a little bit closer than I should have been. Let's put it like that. I hit the back of his car, and I managed to avoid, my wheel managed to avoid it, but my pannier caught it. It flipped me, somersaulted me 3 times up into the air, about 12 feet, and I landed on my backpack. Otherwise, I probably would have broken my back, because I had all my clothes in the back. And that taught me, you don't tailgate. You don't tailgate in a car, you don't tailgate on a bicycle, you don't tailgate on a motorbike. And I would just say, if obviously you're riding or driving a car, just give yourself a bit more space. That's common sense, whether you're driving in a Model S or a Leaf or anything else. Give yourself more space, and then you can see and react if there's something in the road. That's my sage advice. What do you reckon, Mark?
I think it's curious that, the Model S had been driven, it sounds like, about 70 million miles before the first of these events happened, and then we get another one a month later. That just seems odd to me.
Yeah. Anyway,
is it just a crazy fluke that this has happened twice in such close proximity, or I don't know. There was actually some chatter on the mailing list among Northwest owners after the first one happened, which happened about 20 miles from my house. One of the other local owners said that they had to maneuver around some big piece of road debris, and they were, is there a conspiracy theory we should be considering here? I don't know. That seems a little far fetched.
Trucks driving down the road with automatic hitch release mechanisms. Oh, there's a Model S! Quick, guys!
Yeah, but still, it just seems weird that driven so many miles and then it happens twice within a month. It's very odd.
Yes. Moving on, then. I think we just have to see what happens with Tesla. With this Model S. And I think it is the fact the car lowers down, it is lower to the ground. There's nothing really you can do. It's just, you can't stop stuff from hitting your car, and everyone has accidents and cars catch on fire every day. Chelsea Sexton did a fantastic post recently, actually, on Facebook, of a car that was just burst into flames a couple of doors down from her. And she said there was a Model S parked a little ways up the street as well, which I thought was kind of fun. Shame she didn't see the Model S driver running away with a gasoline can. Oh, sorry, that was a joke. I didn't mean to upset anybody there. All right. A few weeks ago, UK Leaf owners began reporting that their Leafs wouldn't charge beyond 80% at Chatterley quick charge stations. And this led to what I think is probably the biggest civil war amongst Leaf owners I have ever seen. It got heated. People were calling each other all kinds of unpleasant, mean, nasty names. It was horrible, wasn't it, Mark?
I see. I stayed out of it. I caught the occasional tweets, but I think the thread, the 30-odd, 40-odd page thread, I was just like, no, I'm not delving into that. That I just catch the highlights as they come out.
But it was quite ferocious. People accusing each other of not knowing how to use the chargers, not knowing how the chargers worked, accusing Nissan of going round and changing all the firmware on all the chargers so that all the charging stations, instead of allowing you to charge up to 80% and then go from 80 to 100, were going, no, you can only charge to 80, and people going, oh, this means that, suddenly the Leaf's no good as a long distance car. Ooh. Now, it turns out we've done some digging, we've talked to Nissan. Nissan's come up with some answers, hasn't it, Mark? It was
a mixture of three, a mixture of two things, with a third thing thrown in just to complicate things, I think. Which was the first one being that there are some chargers that have been being installed which are limited to 80%.
But this is not Nissan's fault. And I think this is the thing that people need to understand. Nissan has made the chargers, or Nissan has been working with a couple of different companies to make chargers for the Leaf, okay? But the Leaf itself and the chargers are made by two different companies, yeah? Nissan's kind of gone, here you go, here's the specs, make it. The people who make it and install it are two different companies. The people who run it, who maintain it, are different from the people who've installed it and who made it. So there's this kind of daisy chain, and I think people have been blaming the wrong people along this chain. Yeah. And you say some of these charging stations have been going out with by DBT with a preset to just 80% and not anymore.
There's also the fact that Nissan has now acknowledged that the car reports a different state of charge than the charger does. So the charger stops putting power into the car, even though there is more available space in the car.
This is not a new thing, and this is why we've got Tom on today. This is Tom's big story, because Tom, you've studied this in great length, haven't you? And from what I understand, when you start charging on the quick charger, the car tells the quick charger how much power, how full the battery is, and then
that's right.
The charger counts up how much energy it's put in, and the car counts up how much energy it's put in. But once the charging starts, the charger doesn't really pay attention to what the car's saying until later on. Is that that was kind of the result of your study, wasn't it, that you made?
The result of my study was that for the Blink and AeroVironment quick charging stations, they relied on the car's estimate of its SOC, which started out being reasonable, but then as it got say up to about 80%, it started to give a number that was too high to the charge station. So basically, the charge station would display a state of charge that was much higher than what the car really had. So around, I think it was 85%, the car told the charge station that it was, in the high 90s. And so that would cause a lot of confusion if the charge station was actually paying attention to that number. And now I haven't had a chance to observe it myself, but my understanding is that was fixed in the 2013 Leaf, that it gives a more accurate statement of what the state of charge is to the charging station.
On the 2013 Leaf that I had when we were testing it, the state of charge percentage as represented on the dash matched the state of charge on the rapid charger I was using when I did it, as in percent for percent. The interesting thing is we found is it seems that even in some 2013 Leafs, when you're using all these third-party scanners which give you a state of charge, it's still mismatching. But the issue there is we've introduced yet another link in the daisy chain of where's that calculation coming from, how's that calculation being made. It's a very complex chain going along, but it seems to have been maybe not overblown. It was definitely a concern, and it was definitely something people should have been getting interested in and becoming active about. I just, maybe the way in which everyone became active wasn't necessarily the best way, and where that information was directed was maybe not the best place.
No. All right, let's move.
The third thing that confused it is that all the charging stations that we've got, the different manufacturers, they're all different, and they don't necessarily follow what I would call good usability design. And coming from a background where I did some usability, it's crazy. Some of the chargers, there are some now where if you go in and say I want 100% charge, it actually doesn't give you that, but then stops at 80. But if you say standard charge, even though it's set at 80, the car overrides that and allows you to go up to 100 because you were more than 50% in your battery to begin with. So there are all of these different factors coming in, and different charging stations work in different ways, have different button combinations.
And that's
it's just craziness out there at the moment in the UK.
And it's not helping. So it's really
I think
not
there's
helping.
another important thing that people need to understand, that according to the study that I did when I wrote that blog, that from the point where you get a 3.3 kilowatt Leaf from 85% to full on a CHAdeMO charging station, you're charging at the same rate as at a level 2 charging station. So actually charging above 80% at a CHAdeMO station is kind of ridiculous. You're basically wasting a quick charging resource when you could be getting the same charge at a level 2 station. And it's even more so for a 6.6 kilowatt. So I can understand a quick charge station not wanting to have a car continue to charge when the charge rate is dropped down close to that level 2 level. They'd rather that person move to a level 2 station and open it up for another quick charge session.
That's not quite the same as in the UK then. It sounds like our chargers work slightly differently. Well, above 80%, you may only be getting 10 amps, but you're getting 10 amps at 400 volts rather than 10 amps at 230 volts. So you are charging twice as well.
I'm talking about the average, though. So at 85%, you're still getting more charge than at a level 2 station, but then it drops considerably by the time you get to the top.
Yeah.
And if you take the average charge rate over that period, then
it's not so
that's
good.
the same as a 3.3 kilowatt charge at a level 2 station.
So the advice is just stop and look at the charging station. Don't panic, and you can normally get them to work. I mean, I came back from London on Friday from the i3 launch event, and from central London back to my house is about 120 miles. I left central London with a fully charged battery pack. There was torrential rain, flooded roads, horrible. I had to have the heater on full blast. I had to stop at Reading, which is 40 miles out of town, Mark, if that.
Yeah.
And rapid charge back up to about 80%. Then I stopped at Membry Services, which is another 30 miles down the road, and stopped and rapid charged. And then I stopped another 20 miles down the road from there, which is a new charging station, new rapid charging station, and it's only 20 miles from the house. And I pulled in, and someone had left the charging connectors pointing upwards in the rain. Torrential rain. And I tried plugging it into my car after shaking it off a bit and blowing in it. Didn't want to talk. fourth attempt after, taking it out, blowing it, shaking it, putting it back in, blowing it, shaking it, putting it back in. And I was on the phone to the guys from the charging provider going, yeah, there's a problem. Oh, hang on, it started working. And they went, yeah, that happens sometimes. All right, moving on. Tesla Model S. How fast will it go on an Autobahn, Mark?
Very fast. Very, very fast.
Very, very fast. We all know that Tesla has a top speed of 132, 133-ish Model S. But the P85 version, which is the performance version, will go from 0 to top speed in 25 seconds. That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
That's pretty quick.
5.25 meters per second on average.
5.25 meters per second. That's pretty fast. Not quite as fast as some cars, but pretty fast. I mean, it goes 0 to 60 incredibly fast, of course, but then that next bit is I think a reasonable speed. So that's good. And finally, in this section, the Q3 financials for Tesla were announced last week. Rise in revenue, a rise in sales, and a rise in production. Very high production for the Model S, but a lot of those cars went to Tesla Model S showrooms or Tesla Model S stores, but also to the service fleet. And Tesla's basically said, a lot of our service cars we are speccing out to be high-end, all bells and whistles cars, because we want our customers to have a comparable or better car when their car is in the shop. Tom, have you had a Model S as a courtesy car yet?
I have not. I did my the annual service this year, I think just before they got that program running.
Yeah, which is, next year.
You timed that badly.
Yeah, next year you're going to have it done. All right, and also some interesting future news that superchargers are making a huge difference in the way that people view Tesla and buy the cars. A lot of people who are going to Tesla and buying Model S's say that superchargers were a defining factor in their choice to buy the car. It's the ability to make those long distance trips. Also, interestingly, European buyers are speccing their cars more heavily or more highly than their American counterparts. It might be because these cars are the first 1,000 cars to come into the country, into Europe, are going to go to early reservers or those who put down a deposit very early on, or investors. It's going to be interesting to see if that continues through. But we'll find out. Mark, it is time for us to have an Audible ad.
It is time to have an Audible ad, but I'm just putting down the time. Audible is an amazing online system. If you like audiobooks, or even if you don't like audiobooks, you should try Audible. It's a online shop, essentially, where you can go and you can buy Audible or audio books. But what's probably the best way to do it is you sign up and you pay a monthly fee, and that monthly fee gives you a certain number of credits, and then you spend the credits on books at a hugely discounted rate, essentially. So one credit generally means one book. And they have loads and loads and loads of books. They have this system in America called, the ACX. ACX? I think it's ACX. I should know that, but I can't remember now. Where self-published writers can put their books up on there. Small publishing companies can put their books up on there if they're based in the US, which is why I don't have that much knowledge of it. And it's absolutely wonderful. So if you like science fiction like me, or fantasy like Weird People, or autobiographies, or old BBC sitcoms, they're all on there, and you can sign up. And if you go to www.audiblepodcast.com/transport evolved and sign up through there, you'll get a month for free, which is one audiobook. And even if you decide not to go forward, you get to keep that audiobook, and we get a bit of money for sending you their way.
This week, we're going to recommend Impulse by Stephen Gould. We've had it on the show before, haven't we, Mark?
Yeah, I know I recognise the name. It's not one I've listened to, unfortunately.
It's very good. It's part of the Jumper series. So if you've seen Jumper, the idea that people can jump from one place to another instantaneously, which is very cool. But this one, Impulse, it's the third book in the series. It's by Stephen Gould, who is a fan of EVs, which is another good reason for having it. It's narrated by Emily Rankin, and actually, my wife makes an appearance in this book. She has a cameo role. He was looking for a programmer. He wanted a programmer to help out one of the main characters in the book, and so she was the person that he chose to be this character, which is kind of cool, I think. But I've just started listening to it. I was listening to it coming back from London on Friday. And this section is very near the start of the book. Let's have a listen. There you go. Sounds good. So that's Impulse by Stephen Gould, you should listen to it. All right, moving forward. Tesla uses a lot of batteries for its cars, obviously. It's just signed a deal with Panasonic to supply 1.8 million battery cells. Sorry, 1.8 billion. 1.8 billion, at least 1.8 billion battery cells. But actually, that's the minimum, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, that's because it was originally reported as 2, and then it got moved down to 1.8, which I think suggests that what they want is 2, but they put a minimum as 1.8.
Well, I mean, 2 was the official announcement, and then for the shareholders and the business side of things, they had to say 1.8, I think, and then they said at least that should be considered a minimum figure. But as part of the Q3 reports earlier this week, Elon Musk said that Tesla is going to be building a monster Giga Factory for producing lithium-ion battery cells for its cars. Now, the thinking behind this is it will be a massive factory, one of the biggest on the planet, if not the biggest for lithium-ion cell production. It will have the lowest carbon footprint of any lithium-ion battery production facility, very green, renewable energy, solar panels, etc., etc. And the battery facility will be essentially a one-stop shop for Tesla to manufacture and recycle battery packs. So you'll get the raw materials coming in one end, they'll be refined, produced, you get the batteries coming out the other end, but also Tesla will be able to take back to this facility spent battery packs, ones that are no longer being used or usable in its cars, and they will recycle the components as necessary and go back. Now, Tom, I'm going to test your chemistry knowledge here. A large proportion of Tesla's battery pack can be recycled, can't it?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yeah.
It's something like 90, the high 90s, I think, 95%, I want to say.
I know the figure the Leaf, the Nissan keeps banding around for their Leaf is 97.5%.
Yeah.
Recyclable.
Yeah, actually there was a nice presentation about that at Plug-in 2013. And amazingly, it sounds like it's not economically viable to recycle the lithium, but the other bits in the battery are valuable and extractable.
It's going to be interesting, though, to see what happens to the price of battery cells. If Tesla is going to start producing battery cells in this high quantity, I can see a future where Tesla's selling the cells to other people, which could put it in a very interesting financial situation, especially if it's got, if it manages to secure lithium, large amounts of lithium at a sensible enough price. And of course, producing batteries on that large scale will also mean that it has access and the buying power in the market to obtain all the raw materials it needs. Likewise, Elon Musk was interviewed again by Betty Liu from Bloomberg this week. And one of the things he let slip was that Tesla could start selling to dealerships. I'll say that again. Tesla could start selling its cars through dealerships in the future. Now, Elon Musk said that it's a bit like Apple, as far as he's concerned. People go to Apple stores for the experience. He wants them to go to Tesla stores for the experience. But you can buy an iPad or an iPhone at Walmart, at Best Buy. You don't necessarily, I don't know many people who would go to Best Buy to buy an iPad. They'd go to the Apple store. And I think what Elon Musk is saying essentially is, yeah, we could in the future consider it selling through dealerships, but essentially we'd want people to come to us direct.
Interestingly, the Apple model, before Apple really kind of had its big boom with the iPod, in fact, even after that, there weren't a lot of Apple stores in the UK. I mean, there was the one in London where I was in Cardiff. Cardiff didn't have an Apple store until maybe 5 years ago. So we had what was essentially a small family business owned shop, which was an Apple approved store, but wasn't an Apple store. And I could see that happening with Tesla. So it saves them the expense of making these flashy showrooms. And essentially it allows smaller businesses, although you'd have to be fairly large businesses to have a stock of Model S's, but to have a Tesla certified store.
But I think what people will do is you've hit the nail on the head. There's an Apple approved reseller in Bristol still. And then the Apple store, there are 2 Apple stores in Bristol. Most of the time, if you've got a problem with your product, you go straight back to the Apple store. You go for the buying, for the experience. But I think some people will prefer to go with a garage that they've known for dealer that they've known for a while, or and I hate to use this term because I know Americans don't like it, middle America. The idea of having, some more remote towns and cities in the US aren't big enough to have their own Tesla store, but they might be big enough to have a general car dealership where the guy or the girl running it, happens to be able to get an order for a Tesla once in a while, and someone will come in and says, "Can you get me a Tesla?" The ability for them to be able to go, "Yeah, sure, I'll just order one from Tesla," might help Tesla out and might help them out. And it might be the difference between a customer and a not customer.
What you're saying is maybe we should expand Transport Evolved and become a Tesla reseller in the UK. I would love to do that.
That would be fun, wouldn't it? All right. At the same time, though, in this Betty Lou video, she got to see Elon's house, which is 7 bedroom, 11 bathrooms.
Makes no sense.
And this is the interesting thing. Elon Musk rented for a large number of years and has only recently bought his house. He's only recently felt financially, okay, things are on a level we can buy a house now. And this is the interesting thing. What does he do at the weekend? He plays computer games. This is very little, very sweet section showing him sitting cross-legged playing on a PC, playing computer games on this massive projected screen, which obviously we don't have. But yes, there we go. All right. In non-related news, BMW i8 will make its official UK debut at the 2013 LA Auto Show, Tom, which will take place from the 20th of November. That's great news for EV fans. Someone saw an i8 out and about in California last week, and it looks absolutely stunning without all of its camouflage on, doesn't it?
I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen the i8? Mark, you've seen the i8, haven't you?
Even I think it looks nice, and I don't tend to like those types of cars.
Okay, well, we'll load up the picture. Here we go.
I get the first test drive.
You absolutely do. And I will tell you why after the show, and it's got nothing to do with BMW. Mark, you know the reason. This is the car. Oh, no, that's the car. i8 out on the freeway, on the 101. It looks great. I think it looks great. Obviously, not very huge electric range, though. 30 miles.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But hey, BMW think they've solved the world's problems with electric cars and that they've revolutionised it. I mean, that was one of the things that got on my nerves about this event I was at on Friday was BMW all the way through. We're the first to revolutionise cars. We're going to change the world of electric cars. And my sort of endearing opinion of the i3 was it doesn't do anything that any other car on the market doesn't already do. And it costs more. So it's a luxury version of everything else we've already got on the market.
My favourite thing while you were live tweeting and answering the questions and asking questions on people's behalves was watching the reactions on Twitter. And it went from everyone being really, really excited at the beginning to people going, but that doesn't make... And they want more money there. And people still came out of it excited about the car and what it's going to bring. But it took what had become this. It was very similar to the Zoe.
Yes.
The excitement before the Zoe.
Yeah.
This is going to change everything. This is the car. And then BMW's own promotion of the car destroyed that image that they'd worked to create, which was, I thought, marvellous.
The best bit was, sorry, Mark, the best bit was the drag race that they set up at Brands Hatch. And there's a couple of videos online from websites mainly, some of whom should have known better, going, oh, look, the i3 is just as fast as an M3 to 60 or to 50 or whatever. And we were in the last car to go up against the M3, and I watched all the M3s go up the track, and what they did was someone had obviously prepared the car when they were race prepared cars. None of them had launch control or traction control. And, the person went, ready, steady, go. Well, Americans would have just been embarrassed by the Brits' drag racing skills. But anyway, the i3s took off. And then about half a second later, the BMW M3 started to squiggle and squirm. Lots of wheel spinning, tyre spinning, lots of back end wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. And then after about a second and a half, they actually then took off and caught up. And you think, that was a bit of a setup, really. And on paper, the M3 and the i3 do not get to 60 miles an hour at the same speed. But there we go. Let's move on to our and finally. Do you watch much TV, Tom?
Awesome.
Yeah. Do you watch Top Gear?
I do not.
Okay. So, you know about Top Gear. British show, loves cars, hates EVs. American version of the show, which is 4 years old now, Mark? A bit longer than that, maybe?
My Top Gear knowledge is atrocious. Sorry.
Okay, so the franchise, it's because it's a very complicated thing. BBC Top Gear, it started off as a BBC show. It's now grown into this mega global franchise, which is not owned, I don't think, by the BBC. It's owned by Top Gear. It's got its own company now, which of course is part owned by Jeremy Clarkson. The Top Gear show has been licensed around the world. So there was an Australian version for a couple of years. There's been an American version. And it's essentially the same show. Three guys, silly car pranks, muck around, do weird things, okay? Now, Top Gear UK is known for hating EVs with a passion. They've set up electric cars lots. Okay, they have done a trip in the middle of the country with a Nissan Leaf and a Peugeot Ion, purposely not plugging the car in overnight so that it would run out of charge the next day, which Nissan caught them in the act of doing because they've got telematics. Tesla obviously took them to court and sued them because they claimed that the car, or they insinuated that the Tesla Roadster would run out of charge after about 25 or 50 miles or something, which is complete and utter nonsense. But the American version did a 1 hour special on the History Channel on electric cars. This is what it contained. Fairly jovial review of the Nissan Leaf, Ford Focus Electric and Fiat 500e. 3 NEDRA, National Electric Drag Racing Association cars, which all beat a Corvette ZR1 on a drag strip. Some light-hearted challenges, which included a reverse to see who could reverse the fastest in reverse gear. And of course, one of the presenters got Nissan to remove the speed limiter on their Leaf so they could go 50 miles an hour in reverse gear. There was the standard driving around. One of them was can you see how quiet your car is by sneaking out of the house and then driving around the lot and then coming back. Who's got the quietest car? And then there was a shopping mall race after hours through a shopping mall in Michigan to try and outrun a mall cop on a Segway. It was all light-hearted stuff, driving around a mall because it's zero emissions, so they don't have to worry about, polluting anything or hurting anybody. It was really light-hearted and very good fun. The denouement was the winner of those 3 challenges or 4 challenges got the chance to review a Model S. And it was a decent review, talking about the Model S in a decent, happy, we like the car way. And the conclusion, which I'm not even going to sort of spoil with, was fantastic. And someone in the chat room has just put it up. It's on the History Channel. If you go to www.history.com/top-gear, and then if you go to that will show you, you should be able to watch the show. It's called Top Gear Fully Charged, which is quite a nice title for that particular episode. But Top Gear, who knew it? Top Gear loves EVs after all, Mark. Hell hath frozen over. Do we think the Brits will follow suit?
Not a chance on earth. Not a chance, because it would mean Jeremy Paxman would have to say he was wrong about something, and that's just an impossibility. That's like the universe exploding. It just won't ever happen.
Oh well. I'll tell you what, that's it. We're done. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tom. I'm sorry we had some technical problems. Will you come back again soon?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Come back very soon. We like having you on. Mark, I hope your computer is feeling well soon.
I'm sure it will be. It's just a bit upset after I made it do 10. It was a bit kind of like, no, too much. It took me 6 hours to render out that 9.5
And
minute video.
to give you an idea, Mark's computer is so underpowered. It took you 6 hours to render it, and then how many hours to upload it?
Upload it. It was a 400 megabyte file, so it was 4.5 hours to upload.
Okay, now when you're here doing it where I'm standing right now on my main studio machine, which is this one here, how long does it take?
It renders in about 20 minutes, and then it uploads in about 3.
So Transport Evolved is going to start. We're still trying to raise funds, and as I said a couple of weeks ago, when I upset someone, if you have an ad blocker on your computer, which most normal people do, please consider turning it off for Transport Evolved, because you'd help us, because we're ad supported, and that means we get a little bit more money, and then we can buy Mark a new computer because he needs it to edit the shows.
I'm just going to start. I reckon it would be better for me to hire a botnet or something like that. One of those Russian botnets is what I need.
For editing Transport Evolved. You did a very good review this week of the Smart for 2 ED. We've got another one coming up this week, haven't we, Mark? The Zoe.
We do. For the Zoe, I will be getting on that on Tuesday, so that should be very, very cool.
Yep, and that really is it, folks. We'll be back next week at the usual time of 7 p.m. Sorry, British Greenwich Mean Time. That was a bit bad, wasn't it? At 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which is 8 p.m. if you're on the east coast 8 p.m. if you're on Central European, 9 p.m. if you're in the east of Europe. It is 2 p.m. on the east coast of the US and 11 a.m. on the west coast. So it must be just about lunchtime for you now, Tom.
It is indeed.
Go and have lunch. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
And as always, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.